The wagon wheels had groaned across the dry plains of what would one day be Idaho. 8 wagons moved slowly along the Boise River, their canvas tops catching the late summer sun. Inside them were families, men, women, children, headed for Oregon, clinging to the hope of a new beginning. They were led by Alexander Ward, a former trapper who had traveled this wilderness before. He knew its quiet. He trusted its silence. But that silence had teeth. They had made camp near a bend in the river. The water was calm, the trees still. The air felt heavy. There were no birds, no rustling in the brush, just the creaking of axles and the quiet talk of travelers too tired to speak loud. Some of the men kept rifles close at hand, though there had been no sign of danger. Late in the morning, a group of native men appeared. Shoshone or Bannock, no one could say for sure. They came on foot, seemingly unarmed, and approached with gestures of peace. They asked for food, tobacco, supplies. The settlers offered what little they could spare. A few even smiled. But the men didn't leave. Alexander Ward stood near the lead wagon when the first shot cracked through the stillness. It struck him square in the chest. He fell without a sound. His teenage son, Elias, rushed to him, but a second shot dropped the boy before he could reach his father. Chaos followed. Gunfire erupted from the trees. Arrows fell from the sky. Screams tore through the camp as settlers scrambled for cover that wasn't there. The wagons offered little protection. Some tried to fight back, others ran. But there was nowhere to go. One man was pulled from a wagon and killed in front of his children. A mother was struck down while shielding her baby. Bodies fell into the Boise River. Blood soaked the grass. What had begun as a peaceful exchange became a massacre in a matter of moments. 16 people were dead before it ended. The attackers took supplies, tore through what remained, and then set the wagons ablaze. The smoke rose in thick columns, curling against the pale sky. The few survivors hid in the brush, some clutching bleeding wounds, others holding on to silence as tightly as breath. Hours later, a patrol from Fort Boise arrived, but they found only scorched earth and shattered lives. The smell of gunpowder and blood still clung to the air. Burnt wagons lay in heaps. Bits of clothing drifted downriver. The soldiers collected the bodies. There were no attackers in sight, no trail to follow. The survivors told what they could. A boy, barely old enough to speak, stared blankly ahead and said nothing. A woman sat with her back to the river, her dress stained with blood that wasn't hers. She never spoke again. The newspapers called it a savage attack. The settlers called it betrayal. The army called it inevitable. No one knew for sure why it happened. Some claimed it was retaliation, an answer to an earlier killing. Others said the land itself had become too crowded, too tense, that this was just one spark in a fire already burning. But the truth sank with the dead, and no explanation could ever bring them back. For years after, no one camped near that stretch of the Boise. Locals said the place felt wrong. Horses refused to drink from the river there. Travelers heard voices at night, low murmurs in a language they didn't know, drifting through the trees. Some claimed to see wagon tracks appear and vanish. Others swore they saw smoke where there was no fire. The Ward massacre faded into the dust of other tragedies, one among many on the long road west. But in that place, where cottonwoods grow thick and the river runs shallow, something old still lingers. And sometimes, when the sun begins to set, the wind carries the sound of footsteps, though there's no one on the trail. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.